It is all happening in Melbourne, it would seem, this morning. An earthquake shook the city just after 9 a.m. It didn't strike in Melbourne, though. It struck at Mount Buller, below the surface, around 10 kilometres, and it was a magnitude 6 earthquake. This is, by Australian standards, significant, and you can see that from the damage. This is near Chapel Street. In Melbourne, and I believe this is the Betty Burgers precinct that has been significantly damaged here. Just repeating, we've got no reports of injuries just yet anywhere in the city, so that is good news because there is significant damage to some of these buildings. Let's go live now to Chrissie Moores. She is the General Manager of the Chapel Street precinct. Of course, we're keeping an eye across the protests as well. Chrissie Moores, good to see you. Thanks so much for your time. What has happened in your part of the world?
Well, it would seem we keep getting dished up more and more. And just behind me here, I actually live in Windsor. And just for clarity, those pictures that you were showing are Chapel Street in Windsor.
Oh, right.
Near the Nika building. And that building has come down. It's a very old Conway building. And then directly across the road, which you're seeing now on the vision, that building is so old, and it is almost like a 3-year-old has kicked a Lego house and it's come down. A lot of these are like powder. They're so old. There's a lot of people on the street. I'm still in my pyjamas, as you can see now. And I think that there's a lot of shock. We're Australians. We don't know what to do if there's an aftershock. I live, and the background that you're seeing behind me on this Skype call is actually the site that has been wrecked. So I live, that site that you can see behind me is about 10 metres away from where it all came down. So the noise, I don't often get shaken, but it was scary and it was loud. And I live in a really new building in Mars Gallery on James Street in Windsor, and all I heard was crashing. And the earthquake, I remember being in Bali, and an earthquake just felt like a soft kind of tremor. This shook hard, and as things shook, you could hear the Betty's Burger site come down in Windsor. You could hear rubble going down. I was focusing on a tree in the park across from my James Street Windsor apartment, and our newer build gallery that I live in was, God, I can't tell you how scary it was. And there's, like I said, there's helicopters in the air above me right now. And you've got to remember, Chapel Street is full of these old, beautiful buildings. But in terms of the structural damage, we've been in contact with, obviously, all the emergency services and the Stonington Council. We're now focusing on building integrity. But we're also focusing on getting communication out to people about what to do in aftershocks, because here in Australia, we don't really talk about earthquakes. So a lot of us were wondering what we even have to do if we have another one. I know a lot of people thought it was just workers on their roof. But for me, it was loud because there was crashing and buildings coming down around me. As you can see, just behind me is actually where the site that came down. So Chapel Street, Windsor, is got some of the most beautiful, oldest Conway buildings. And unfortunately, the world huffed and puffed and they blew down.
Chrissie, we've seen this building that you speak of in Windsor and the enormous damage to it. But from what you have seen and heard this morning, is that being replicated right up and down the street? Is this an anomaly? Is the damage far more extensive?
In terms of the structural damage of buildings, we're obviously in contact with the City of Stonington and we're working on building integrity. We have been advised that in Chapel Street, around Paran Square, there has been building damage. Also up on the South Yarra end, there has been many buildings evacuated just to make sure that people living in those buildings around the street are actually not in compromised positions where we may have had the shake and then the building hasn't, had visible damage like you can see the vision that you're showing now in Windsor. But there will be a lot of sites around this area given the amount of old, beautiful buildings that we have in heritage, that they are evacuating people. And so that second site is around Paran Square in Paran, just off Chapel Street. And then there are other apartment buildings. I can only imagine many around the city right now being evacuated to take caution around structural damage. But like I said, I think that the communication now to Australians and certainly everyone in Melbourne needs to be focused on what happens if that wasn't the big one, what do we do in an aftershock, you know?
Indeed, yeah, that's you're spot on there, Chrissie.